Sam, welcome, and thank you for joining us and for your willingness to be our first person today. We have a very short time for you to cover an awful lot of happened in your life, and we're going to focus, of course, on the Holocaust, and we'll start right away. The war began with Germany's invasion of Poland in September 1939. You were not quite yet 2 years old, but before we turn to the war years and the Holocaust, let's start first with you telling us about your parents and their life before the war began.
Sure. My parents were born in eastern part of Poland. My mother in town Mezrich, and my father in a little town Wohin. These were small towns, especially Wohin. They had maybe 1,000 Jews in the population of a few thousand people. They moved to Warsaw when they were teenagers. Their education was rather meager. They had about 4 or 5 grades of Polish school, and their Polish was rather rudimentary. Later on, when I grew up, I realized they spoke to each other in Yiddish, and that's where my understanding of the language is. Although I don't write and I don't read it well, but I do understand it, and it became important down the road. So they did meet in Warsaw, he a tailor, she a seamstress, and then I came into this world in about 2 years before World War II broke out.
Sam, how large was your extended family?
Well, it was quite large. On my mother's side, she had 3 brothers, married with family, with wives and kids. And on my father's side, there were more brothers, but 2 of the brothers have moved from Poland to Argentina before the war started. The other 3, which includes my father and 2 of my uncles, whom I never met because they were victims of the war. As a matter of fact, one of my uncles died in a way that didn't happen with him what was supposed to happen between my father and my mother. As Bill alluded, my father escaped to the Soviet-occupied part of Poland, and they had a deal that at some point in time they get reunited. Either my father comes back, or it was basically an exploration. Where is it safer? Because Warsaw was being bombed and people were dying daily. So that was the plan. And that apparently was the same plan with my uncle, also from Warsaw. Unfortunately, what happened to them was that my cousin, who still lives in New York, she's much older than I am, and my aunt, her mother, went just like myself and my mother, but they never connected in Russia. And my uncle was desperate in finding them, couldn't find them. He returned to Poland, and that was the end of him. I don't know how he perished, and they never connected.
Sam,
The oldest one was a fighter in World War I, and he ended up marrying a German lady after World War I, and we don't know whatever happened to him.
and he moved to Germany, right?
He moved, right. He moved and he lived in Germany with his Jewish German wife. And the only thing I have is a friend of mine who visited Poland and visited the concentration camp of Majdanek, that he caught my last name with somebody's first name, David, just like him. The age, apparently the same age that he was supposed to be, from 1880s or something like that. And he was listed among hundreds of people who on that day died from some pneumonia. That was the description in the camp of how these people died. So they all suddenly died of pneumonia. We know better. They didn't die of pneumonia.
Sam, almost immediately after Germany invaded Poland, they attacked Warsaw, where your family lived.
Right.
And as you said, your parents had this plan, and so your father fled to Soviet Union, but your mom didn't.
Yeah, my mother had an extensive family. She had 3 brothers, all married with children, and parents, and she was reluctant to escape right away. My father was a leftist, so he probably had this tendency to move into the Soviet-occupied part of Poland because the Germans attacked on September 1. On September 17, the Soviets attacked Poland from the east. It was part of this Hitler-Stalin pact. And that's where my father escaped to see if it is safer, because they did not know what to do. The city was bombed. In 1 month of September in 1939, about 20,000 people were killed because of bombing, and they had to be buried in squares and parks because people couldn't keep up with that. And on top of that, the main government, Polish government, escaped on the 3rd day of the war. They showed up later on in England.
Once your father was in Russia, do you know if he was able to communicate with your mother at that time?
I suspect, I don't know for sure, because I was either too small or too dumb to ask the question when he was alive, and later on it was too late. But I do know that there was part of the pact was a postal communication that they maintained between that Soviet-occupied and the German-occupied parts of the Poland. So I suppose that they exchanged mail, and maybe that was a reason for them meeting, for us meeting.
Sam, once the Germans were in control of Warsaw after all the bombing and their attacks on it, they pretty quickly created a ghetto, which is where you and your mom ended up. But what do you know about what that was like for you and your family, your mother?
I don't remember. I mean, I was two some years old, but from my parents, and especially my mother, telling me, soon after the Germans occupied physically Warsaw, which happened at the end of September, the Jews were being brought into that area that became the ghetto, and my mother had to wear the armband that identified her as a Jewish person. I didn't, because I was just a small toddler. It's important because it plays a part in how we escaped. I need to tell you, I'm one of the lucky ones that I survived. 1 out of 10 people, 1 out of 10 Jews who survived. The other 9 did not. So my mother...
In fact, I think I understand that of all the children that were in the Warsaw Ghetto, less than 1% survived.
That's true. Yeah. That's true, because that was, eventually the ghetto was liquidated, which meant that all the Jews were meant to be killed.
But your mom made this extraordinary decision to try to escape from there.
We made it early on, actually before the ghetto was completely surrounded. And at that time, Jews were not allowed to travel by train. And since she was from the eastern part of Poland, she knew about the following, that the river Bug, which separated the German forces from the Soviet forces, that river used to freeze up in the winter in some places. So When she made the decision to escape with me, she obviously was counting on getting down to the river and somehow cross that boundary. You know, the war between the Soviet and the Russians was still a year later, more or less. So one day she just packed what she could and took me, she carried me to the train station. And disregarding the fact that Jews were not allowed to travel, she actually got into a wagon. As she came in, she tells me, that's what I know, that there was a priest there, Polish priest, who called her up and said, please take off that armband and get yourself and the kid behind me. And she tells me later that whenever the police or the gendarmes were walking by asking for documents, he would tell them, the woman and the kid are from my parish. So to make a long story short, I know this man saved my life, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you, and my mother's life. And later on when I asked her, when I grew up a little bit, did you know him? She said, no, she did not know. Did he take any money? No. So we don't know who we owe our lives, who we owed. And that's the story. Somehow we made it to the river, and I don't know the details. Like I said, I was too dumb, too small to worry about it, to ask about it, how we made it, but she knew enough to get to the river. And she tells me that she waited for the night, and when the night came, she just stepped on the ice and decided to walk across. And the poor woman was slipping and sliding, and to me it was really funny, and I started to laugh. Couldn't keep my mouth shut. It was night, and she tells me she was worried that either the Germans or the Soviets will kill us because they hear these noises. So to shut me up, she gave me pictures that she took with her of family pictures. So I apparently shut my mouth and I was looking at them. By the time we ended up getting to the other side, she tells me all the pictures were torn up, so I'm guilty. I'm guilty as charged.
Sam, once you made it to the other side of the river, to the Russian side, and as you noted, Russia and Germany were allies at that time, do you have any idea why the Russians wouldn't have just simply sent you back to the other side?
Well, no, I don't know why they didn't. My mother was telling me she remembers about dogs and soldiers, so obviously we were caught by the Soviet border patrol, whatever it is. No, they did send some people back. I think predominantly those who looked like they were religious Jews, or because it was a communist regime, they didn't care for that kind of people. Why they didn't send me and my mother back, I don't really know. And I don't know exactly how they managed to connect my mother and I with my father. The only suspicion I have was that the Soviet Secret Service, the KGB, was very efficient. They knew where everybody was, and the rest is history. So I don't know how long I was there. I was just too small to remember. And again, I was too dumb to ask when I could because I didn't think about it. I was small.
Sam, you shared with me that one of your earliest recollections, though, that you recall, was being at a camp where your father was a lumberjack. Can you tell us a little about that?
Right. Apparently, after we were reunited, and I don't know how long it took, whether weeks or months, but I do know for a fact that we were sent by a train to Siberia. It's western Siberia, west of Ural Mountains, and not far from the Arctic Circle south. But I do have a copy, which I found recently, literally about 2 years ago, from Russian documents that lists specifically the train number, the date, and the list of all the people that were on that train that were sent to Siberia. And there were, as far as I know, 4 such trains from that region where we were. Where we were was Ukraine, the western part of Russia. So from that region, we were sent, and I have my name, my parents' name, my birthday, etc. So they knew who they were sending. There was mostly Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians that were sent up north to that autonomous Republic of Komi. And that is already, when I arrived, as Bill said, to that first town, it was, I remember, called Kotlas. And Kotlas used to be a gulag, a kind of a camp that existed during the Tsar's time, where they sent people that were undesirable to labor, to work in those gulags. So that was the first camp, and that's where my tailor father became a lumberjack. And became a lumberjack because the only type of labor that could be done there was cutting trees, cutting the branches, and then send the trees down the river, because I do remember my father up to his neck in the water, and I remember him with other men literally by hand cutting these trees, because that was the only work there. There were no factories there, or so that, and I don't know, we spent at least probably half a year there, because these are my earliest remembrances of my family, myself, and that camp, that labor camp, yeah.
And from there, you ended up then at Syktyvkar.
Right. We spent, like I said, maybe half a year or so in that camp of Kotlas, and then they sent us further north to the capital of that republic called Syktyvkar. It was a larger town, and that's where my father and my mother were both employed. He as a tailor, and my mother as a seamstress, and they both worked in factories that made uniforms or clothes for the military. And I presume that that was already when the war between Soviets and Germany began.
Tell us about your housing arrangement there, especially when you first arrived.
For some time in that Kotlas, I remember living in a yurt. Yurt is a big teepee, or like a big tent where the natives used to live. And we lived with an elderly native woman. The natives were actually a tribe coming from Mongolia, I think, because they spoke this native Komi language, which I learned a few words, a little bit, yeah. So we lived there, and then once we were in Syktyvkar, I remember some sort of an apartment. The system was not organized, so my father used to take me to his factory some days, or my mother to her factory, and I was hanging around while they were using the sewing machine to their work. Later on, I was assigned to some sort of a kindergarten, because apparently there were more kids like myself that they needed to do something with. So I ended up in a kindergarten, I guess.
And while you were there, your mother gave birth to twins who died.
Right. Yeah, that I remember. That's where in Syktyvkar, my twin brothers were born. I remember seeing them. And then I remember seeing them when they were dead. So it didn't take too long because they were still very small. I don't know if they were a few months old, something like that. And I just learned that they were dead. And the topic never came up because, like I said, when I grew up, I was growing up as a child in Poland, in communist Poland, and I didn't think about asking things like that. And my mother obviously wasn't interested in telling me, not because I was not interested, because probably it was very painful. So I never found out why or how, what was the reason that they died. I presume, that's just my pure guess, that there was no medical help because all the doctors, I suppose, were in the front fighting with the Germans. I mean, that was the main job of professionals in Russia. Yeah.
You've shared with me several different things about your life in that part of Siberia, and one of the things you shared with me is you remember your mother bringing home an egg, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, that was a part of a funny story. She brought apparently an egg, and I said, "What is that?" Because apparently I never seen an egg or something like that. And I remember also there was, because wherever they worked, they used to get coupons for food. So there was one coupon for an egg or two, I don't know, and maybe for some...
This was for rationing purposes.
Rationing, yeah, rationing, I'm sorry. Rationing coupons. So one time I remember she was telling me, "Sam, you got sick because you ate the whole chunk of butter that we had for a whole month." And I did not know. It tasted good, so I ate it. And
You also told me, and this was amazing, that while you are there in remote Siberia, you saw a lot of exotic animals.
That's true. That's true. When the war began between the Soviets and the Germans, the beginning were rather sad for the Soviets. They were retreating across thousands of miles, retreating east. And they were moving people and machines and whatever they could. And among other things, even animals from the zoos, from the, So in that forsaken place of Siberia there, I saw an elephant. I didn't know what it was, but I remember it, okay? So Bill is making light. Where the heck is an elephant in Siberia? What is he doing now? Well, apparently he was a lucky elephant that was moved with the population and factories and whatever else could be moved east.
Yeah. Everything they could take east.
Everything that they could take, and among them there were also still refugees, Jews and Poles who were trying to escape from the war, and they were just escaping east as far as they could go.
In 1944, you and your family were taken from Siberia to Ukraine. Why was that, and then what was life like in Ukraine for you?
Well, I was in the so-called kindergarten. That's the time when I became aware that there was a war. And it's not like I read papers, or there was a loudspeaker in the room by the ceiling, and there was a serious voice coming out of it. It was constantly talking about the war and our brave soldiers. In the beginning, the brave soldiers were retreating in orderly fashion, but I guess around 1942, end of 42, The brave soldiers were advancing in the opposite direction. That must have been after the big battle of Stalingrad, which was the largest in Second World War. So that is my awareness of the war. I didn't realize what it meant except knowing that something bad was going on. Many years later, I asked my father about those times. He told me that apparently in 1943 or beginning 44, sometimes around those days, the Soviet government actually offered these refugees Soviet citizenship for those who wanted to become. Very few became. I asked my father, why didn't you become? Well, he was smart enough to know that if we would become, we may not have the right to return to Poland. Because once you're a citizen, you do what the government tells you. That was communism. So he wanted to go back to Poland to find out what happened to the families. He didn't know anything. There was no internet, telephones, what have you. There was no newspapers that described this thing. So obviously, we did not know. I did not know, of course, and my parents didn't know whatever happened to their family. So that was the reason that what the Russians did is they moved families like us to Ukraine, because at that time Ukraine was already liberated and it was closer to Poland. So they just wanted to have all these people as close to Poland as you could get. Be ready eventually to move to Poland. Yeah.
Once you were, I think, in the town of Kherson,
Yeah.
You shared with me that you were amazed then to see that your father was driving farm equipment, driving a combine, I think.
Right.
So
right.
Was that labor he was forced to do there?
Well, there was very little choice in labor.
Right.
We were moved to Kherson, which is in Ukraine, warmer than the Siberia. And one of the first jobs that, because he was a man, and men presumably learn how to drive cars or combines. I remember seeing my father on a big combine. Now I just wonder how the heck this man who never had anything mechanically driven or even a bike was driving this huge machine. But he did, I remember it. But eventually we ended up closer to this town, Kherson, because that combine was from the farm, the state-owned farms that where there were no men. Men were fighting the war.
They're fighting the war.
Right. So eventually we settled into outskirts of this town, Kherson, which was not far from the river Dnieper. And a couple things about Kherson was, one, my sister was born when we were in Kherson. I got myself sick with malaria when we were in Kherson. And in Kherson was the first time when I found out that I was a Jew, because my father didn't go around me and tell me, Sam, you know that you are a Jew. No. He was not a religious practicing Jew, but I found out not from him. It was an episode where my parents and I were going to a farmer's market, to buy some food or I don't know what. And as I walk with them, there is a man, a quadriplegic man with no lower legs. He was pushing himself on a board with some wheels. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. And he pulled up next to me and just cursed us out. And I don't want to repeat all the bad words, but how the heck you Jews survived? Didn't Hitler finish you off? And I was just taken aback because I understood it was Russian. Nobody needed to translate it to me. So I had a talk with my father, and he said, well, Sam, yeah, we are Jews, and we are not very much liked around here. So that's the man who spit out his guts. And that's how I found out that I was a Jew. There was a very similar incident where my father took me. It was the fall of 1945. It was after the war. War has ended already. I became aware of it a different time. And I walked into a room. I did not know where I was, but I saw a whole bunch of young men in uniforms, military uniforms. They even had their arms next to them, and they were sort of moving like that. I did not know what they were doing, and they were chanting. And what was very striking to me, and I never forget it, they had tears in their eyes. I didn't expect it from young men, military men. You know, they're the heroes of a boy like me. And I remember the episode. I did not sit down with my father to discuss it then because I was a kid. I had other things on my mind. But many years later, very many years later, I remembered I asked my father, what was that episode? And I described to him, just like I am describing to you. So he tells me that was a makeshift synagogue. And the day we went, it was the day of Yom Kippur, 1945. And that's a day of atonement among the Jews, and they pray to God for forgiveness and all that. And I asked him, why were these men crying? And he said, these were the Jewish boys in the Soviet army that just returned from Poland or Germany. They were coming back home to Russia somewhere, and they decided to celebrate the Yom Kippur, and that's what I saw. So that was another event that sticks in my in my mind.
Sam, you shared with me that once you were allowed by the Russians to return to Poland, that was quite a journey. You traveled in cattle cars, packed in to get to Poland. Once you got there, your home became a gathering place, I think you said, for survivors.
Yeah, that's true.
Will you tell us about that?
Yeah. In February of 1946, my family, including my sister, and many other Jewish families from the area were put into a cattle car train to Poland. I think the trip took about 2-3 weeks. It was a long, slow trip. It was a bitter cold winter, I remember. We ended up stopping in a town, and when we got out from the train, I saw, and I remember the name of the train station was Reichenbach. It was written in German yet. From the distance of time, I understood what happened. I don't know how many of you know the geography after the war, but between Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, they redrew the map of Poland. It was not like the map you saw earlier on. It was changed. It so happened that the deal was that the Allies will take a piece of Germany, the eastern part of Germany, and give it to Poland, and they took eastern part of Poland and gave it to Russia. All the Germans from these towns and that area were very encouraged to move on west. So this was a ethnic cleansing in some sort of a form. And so essentially Poland received an area, let's say like the state of Maryland or, something of that size, which was free of German population essentially, and largely undestroyed physically towns, which were small towns. They didn't play a significant role. That was also the reason why we were moved there, because although I was from Warsaw, there was nowhere in Warsaw to live. Warsaw was basically obliterated, but that's another story. So they moved us into that eastern part of Germany. It became Lower Silesia. Eventually the town of Reichenbach became town of Dzierżoniów in Polish, and within a year or two it became a very large assemblage of surviving Jews, not by accident, but that's a different story. It became a largest concentration, I would say, of Jews in Poland right after the war. The things I remember is that there was lots of Jewish people. We were an unusual family in the sense that there was a mother, a father, and 2 children, a family unit.
You were intact, a family unit that was
A
intact.
family intact, right. Typically, it was a single man or a single woman, some orphan children, maybe an older, elderly man or a woman. Families were a rarity. I'm not saying we were the only ones, but they were rare. Most of the people were most of the survivors were the ones that survived like we did in Soviet Russia, that came back, but many were from the camps, from those who were hiding in the forests or survived the ghettos or the concentration camps. Because we were like a family, people who were single not by their choice, but by the fate. My mother was very a hospitable woman, and people would come in and spend a luncheon on weekends or some holiday, what have you. And, they would drink their vodka and eat whatever my mother would cook up. And tearful conversations. I understood them because they spoke Yiddish. Most of them were not educated, they spoke rudimentary Polish, but not quite well. They preferred the Yiddish. Now, I understood Yiddish because all my life, even as a grown-up, my parents, between themselves, spoke Yiddish. So, I understood. And invariably, the topic was, how did you survive? Did you meet such and such? What do you know about? These are the typical questions that were being asked around. And when I think about it, it sort of goes with that. I'll just repeat one episode. There was somebody by the name Mendel Pasternak who survived Auschwitz. And I probably am going ahead of you a little.
No, go ahead, please.
Why I'm talking about him, because something I remembered well, he was a young man and he survived Auschwitz, and he was telling what he saw in Auschwitz. And the thing I remember him talking about was when the next group of Jews were being led to their doom, to the gas chambers, in a group, This Mendel stood behind some other barbed wires, and he tells, not me, my parents, and whoever was listening, that these people that were led to their death, they knew that they are seeing the last day, and they were yelling to these other people, remember, tell what you saw, remember us, tell what you saw. And that stuck in my mind. Why I'm talking about this? Because after I retired and I started working here, I worked for a while as a translator. And among things that I translated were not only documents, but also audio, video type of things. And there's a whole series of video discs that are copies, that are discs that were made from interviews that were conducted in 1980s and in 1990s in Poland with a group of people who, the Polish people, who were at the age of you guys, high school kids, a little younger, a little older, and of course in 1980s and 90s there were people in their 80s or 90s, but the interviews were conducted with them. And the interviewer, it was a person who spoke Polish, but with an Israeli accent. In other words, they were apparently Jews from Poland who moved to Israel, and they were used as the interviewers in that series of tapes. So in that one tape that I was translating, the person that was interviewed, he was in his mid or late 80s, describes that when he was a kid, right after the war, in other words, right after the war began in Poland, he remembers with a bunch of other kids, boys, sitting on the side of the road or standing and seeing a column of Jews being led into the forest to their execution, being led by the German soldiers. And of course the boys, they knew because there were executions going on there. They used to dig up the graves early beforehand and kill these people. So he says that these people in that column saw these kids and they yelled to them, pray to Jesus, pray to God, pray to save us, pray to save us, tell people what's happening to us. And that's when I remembered that darn talk by this Mendel Pasternak.
Who had come to your home.
Who comes to my parents' apartment in this town, Dzierżoniów, and tells about Auschwitz. And, that's when I remembered him, because I never thought about this, and, you try to put certain things out of your mind, but somehow it sits there. So, that became my motto, do not forget. Because wishes of these people who are being led to death, to me, are most important.
Sam, you were in Poland for a number of years, and you described that time for you before you were able to leave Poland. You were living in Wrocław,
right.
As a really important, formative time for you in your life.
That's true.
Tell us a little about that in the little time we have left, and then how you were able to leave Poland and then begin the journey that took you to France, to Argentina, to the U.S.
I will try to make it a little shorter. So we were living in this town, Dzierżoniów. After 2 years, my parents decided to resettle to the larger town nearby. It's called Wrocław now. Before the war, it used to be Breslau in Germany. And there I went to high school. And that were my very good years, my happiest years, because I was growing up. I learned things, and these were the good years. I fell in love. I had good friends. I had Jewish friends, Polish friends. In 1956, there was another, between the end of the war and what I'm telling you now, Jews were leaving Poland en masse. The first one was right after the war. The second one was after the so-called Kherson pogrom, where a year after the war, there was a pogrom in town of Kherson where about 40-some Jews and men, women, and children were killed. It was a blood libel, you name it. Lots of Jews were afraid. They left Poland. We stayed. And then in 1956-57, there was another anti-Semitic incitement by the Polish communist government. I need to tell you that in those years I was in high school in Poland, and nobody talked about the Jewish catastrophe of Holocaust. It was always described as the Polish citizens were murdered by Germans. So, you don't feel very comfortable. You know what happened, you know who you are, but somehow the politics don't touch you or don't talk about you. But anyhow, there was another anti-Semitic outbreak. I don't want to go into details why, but that was the time that we decided to leave. And of course, that was about some 50,000 Jewish families and people, single people, decided to leave Poland, and the destiny was Israel, go to Israel. When we packed up whatever we could and we were ready to leave, and we started getting letters from Israel, from people who went earlier, do not come, do not come. And the rationale was that the conditions and the climate and all the situation in Israel was very difficult. And my mother was a sickly woman, and they knew that, and they were saying, don't come because Sally, that's my mother's name, will not survive the climate and the living conditions. Israel was a very young country. So we decided to not go to Israel and take our chance on so-called go to Israel via France. So we were able to get a transit visa to France. The idea was to get yourself to Paris, jump off the train, and try to get settled in France. And essentially that's what happened. But the passport, which I still have it today, it was such that it lost validity after 90 days. So after 90 days, I became stateless, just like my parents. So I was a stateless, immigrant or whatever. So that's the situation. We lived in Paris for 2 years, and I was out of high school. I didn't know the language. I had to learn, and ended up becoming an apprentice tailor because, luckily I got a job. Somebody that somebody else knew, give me a job, my father a job, my mother a job, so the three of us worked. We lived in one room, slept in one bed, and anyhow, eventually And we were given documents that were extended for another few months by the police. Eventually, we got arrested. And this time they said, you got to leave. We will not play any more games. We don't care where you go. To make a long story shorter, I was able, at that time I was 20-something, and I was becoming as a, spokesman for the family because I did speak French and I could communicate, blah, 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 and so on. Anyhow, I was able to get a visa to Argentina, and the reason we went to Argentina because of my uncle who was there since the times of depression, and he was able to send us money for the family to take a ship to go to Argentina because we just didn't have even the money to leave France. But eventually, we ended up going to Argentina.
And you were there for 5.5 years.
We were there 5.5 years, and thanks to that, I learned Spanish too.
I think I forgot that on the list.
I became a salesman for the establishment of my mother and father who used to sew things, and I would sell and help them buy, and I became a bookkeeper and what have you. At some point in time, I always wanted to go to university and become an engineer. Well, all this ended up in fiasco, and the admission officer at the University of Buenos Aires declared that my high school diploma ain't worth the paper it's written on because Polish high school was for the dogs or whatever. And besides that, I didn't know the history, and also my Spanish was not good, but he declared it was very bad. Anyhow, so I saw everything was closed for me. And again, I worked about a year very hard. I worked with one of the wholesalers, a Jewish fellow in Buenos Aires, who helped me obtain a contract to work for my father, a contract to work in America for my father because a buddy of his, a Mr. Hamburger, I don't know if there is anybody here old enough to remember hamburger stores in Baltimore. Hamburger used to own a chain of men's clothing stores, and this Mr. Hamburger was a friend of this wholesaler who ended up before the war in Argentina, and he helped me, and eventually we got a immigration visa for my parents and my sister. I unfortunately couldn't come on that immigration visa because I was too old. That's another law. So I ended up coming as a foreign student to the United States. We ended up coming to Baltimore. My father worked in hamburgers. My mother worked in some ladies' store.
And you were able to then go on
and I went to the University of Maryland, and they accepted my Polish high school diploma.
Unfortunately, we're at the end of our program. We didn't have time for you to ask questions of Sam, but Sam's going to close our program in just a couple of moments. And after he's done, he will remain here on the stage, and we invite all of you, any of you, to please come up here and ask him your question, shake his hand, take a photograph with him, just say hi, whatever you want to do. So we absolutely welcome that. And it's really clear that Sam was only able to touch on just a few of the details. I wish we had had all afternoon, but we don't. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. Remind you that we have first-person programs every Wednesday and Thursday until August 8th. Our programs will be live streamed until June 6th, but all programs will be on the YouTube channel. So if you can't come back and be with us in person, you can certainly see some of our other programs, including Sam's will be up on the YouTube channel. It's our tradition at first person that our first person gets the last word.
Okay.
And so with that, I'd like to turn to Sam to close the program, and again, invite you to come up and chat with Sam afterwards if you would like.
Yeah.
Sam?
I always think, what is really the message that I want to convey to you? And I'll try to make it short because the time is short. One is history. It's very important to know history, and I'm very saddened to see the evidence that it is being ignored in education. And a simple example was that you all, I'm sure, have seen the picture of 1945, Times Square in New York, May 8 or 9, I don't remember, and the famous sailor kissing the girl, and about 2 million New Yorkers, what have you, going crazy, right? You've seen that. Well, 2 years ago, I went to the World War II memorial on the mall in here, and there was hardly a person there. It was the Navy marching band, and they walked around with the standards. So in about 70 years, and not only that, but I was trying to find anything in the Washington Post, and I couldn't find anything about World War II, never mind Holocaust. That tells me a lot. It tells me that history is either ignored willingly or unwillingly. I don't know. It just saddens me, and that's why I'm appealing to any of you who has the say and the power. Keep teaching history. If not, if it repeats itself, it's not a good thing. The other thing that I would like to do is quote a philosopher and a historian in Israel called Yehuda Bauer. Yehuda Bauer is one of the researchers of the Holocaust, very respected. He proposed that to the Decalogue, to the Ten Commandments, that you probably all know, that we need to add 3 more commandments. And I like to do that, especially when I see a younger crowd in the audience, high school, middle school, what have you. I hope you don't mind. But he proposed the 11th amendment, thou shalt not be a victim. Of course, he had in mind the Holocaust and so on. And the 12th commandment, do not be a victimizer. But the most important one, the 13th, he said, do not ignore it, don't look away, don't pretend you don't see it. Do something, react. I am saying this especially to the younger kids, talking about bullying and things that you see in schools, or even in daily life, because hatred, anti-Semitism is becoming, unfortunately, more prevalent. I hate to see that. I hate to use that word. I hate to see that. So I would like to just leave you with these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.